Agencyclick presents Everything Film with Film Robot on BNN Bloomberg 1410 AM, also at 103.5 FM HD3, and streaming through Spotify. Just go to Agencyclick and listen to past episodes. Joe O'Leary along with Patrick Shelton, and there's definitely kind of a humorous theme that's running throughout this particular episode, because in addition to Paula Antill, who came from the stages of stand-up comic, we have a longtime stand-up comic and a very busy working actor as well, Mr. Peter Kelamis. Nice to have you on the show. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
Just before we go into what you're doing today, what got you on stage doing stand-up way back when?
Just growing up watching it, and I'm going to age myself, but it's like I remember being a kid watching like the Cara Burnett show was my probably first introduction to it, where I was just fascinated that people could do that for a living, make people laugh. Like if that's unheard of. My dad was a tailor, my mom was a seamstress. It's like those are real jobs. It's not like acting like a jackass should be able to make a living for yourself. It shouldn't work that way, but it did, and it was fascinating to me from day one.
And speaking of Carol Burnett, I always had the greatest deal of respect for her, because she would always start the show by going out and taking questions from the audience, and yes, you never know what you're going to face.
That was my favorite part of the show. Where people would request things like the Tarzan yell and all that stuff. And that used to be my favorite part. That and Tim Conway, watching him do his character work, because I think he's one of the most gifted comedic performers
incredible time
ever in the history of television, history of performing. It was unbelievable.
That old man, I forget the guy's name, but he would just take forever.
Mr. Perry.
Yes. Or something. There was Mr. Tudball was the office guy, but how you doing there, Mrs. Pickens? That guy. And then the old guy would show up in different incarnations, like in the Civil War or whatever, wherever they put him, and it was just hysterical.
What always struck me about you, Peter, is that, and I've met you a couple of times through mutual friends, and you're a very affable guy. And the thing with stand-up comics, and we were talking to Paul about this, you never know what they're like away from the mic. Some can be uproariously funny. Others can be really sullen and unpleasant. And you're just kind of that affable guy.
Well, thank you, first off. And you're right. Some come from, I don't know, when you look at stand-ups, there's always some kind of underlying need, whether it's the need for approval. I mean, I'm going psychological on this, but the need for approval, the need for applause, what have you, a father figure that goes all over the place. And some people come from more difficult kind of backgrounds. I mean, I met comics who really came from nothing and had to fight and claw their way to make a living. And then suddenly they were introduced to stand-up comedy, and suddenly they had this whole world open up. And other people were, a little more fortunate and kind of grew up in the era where there's like clubs everywhere, one-nighters everywhere. Because I grew up in a time where, you had to go on the road to really crappy places for really crappy shows and kind of earn your stripes along the way. And then a few years in, more and more clubs started to open up, and it was a little friendlier environment to perform in, but it used to be pretty nasty.
Yeah, I would imagine that the money wasn't that great. You had to pay your dues, and the money didn't get better and better. So when did you actually get a gig that you went, wow, I can make an income out of this. I can make money. What do you remember as your first kind of entry into actually getting a sizable paycheck? And I'm assuming stand-up comedy didn't give you that right off the bat.
Not right off the bat, but I remember, I think I can't remember if it was when I headlined the club Punchlines for the first time, where in a weekend I was going to make pretty close to what my father made being a tailor for a month.
Wow. Yeah.
And for me, even he was wide-eyed at that point, because they thought of it as kind of a sideline. And when I saw, they saw that I started making a little bit of money at it. I didn't do that every week. Nobody headlined every week. But for that week, it was kind of something special, a bit of an accomplishment.
Peter Kelamis is our guest on Everything Film with Film Robot. Just before we move to other ventures, Mr. Kelamis, I must ask you about a show I'm very fond of, and I watch it constantly in syndication, is Corner Gas. And the episode where is it Bob Lane, your character?
Yeah.
Yeah. plane and you're playing like a one-horse town like Dog River, thinking it's Woolerton.
Right.
But you must have had gigs like that where you're going, okay, these people don't look friendly and I have to make them laugh. This is going to be great.
They're more than I could count. When I started out, my parents never really traveled much or ventured out to different towns exploring, BC or Canada or anything. They weren't that kind of people. But so it was exciting for me when I first started and getting paired up with other comics, specifically a comic who passed away a few months ago, Jerry Owens, who was kind of an old vaudevillian style kind of guy in punchlines. And I got paired up with him and we became kind of a comedic item for years. We paired up well together and they would send us to shows together all the time. And I got to go to places I'd never heard of, didn't want to go back to, couldn't wait to go back to. It ran the gamut. But some of them, after the show, you had to pack your shit and get out of there quickly because, there was physical harm to be had. I remember once we were playing, was it Williams Lake or Yellowknife? I can't remember. It was way up north. It wasn't Williams Lake. It was further north. But during the show, we started the show, everything was going okay, but you could tell it was a rougher crowd. You could tell by the feel. And then two guys wanted to beat the crap out of each other. So everybody went out to the bar, emptied. We got off stage, went outside, watched the fight for 10 minutes, and then came back in, and everybody else came back in, and then we finished the show.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds like a rough crowd.
And just to put a dollar figure on it, what does a way up north gig generally pay a stand-up comic?
It used to vary. I mean, unfortunately, stand-up comic rates, even in the clubs, have not really gone up for a very long time. It's really unfortunate. I mean, I really feel for a lot of friends of mine right now, especially during the pandemic, that we're relying on stand-up comedy and live performances to make ends meet. These people are really hurting and continue to hurt. And it's a really difficult situation. I feel really badly for them, but gigs like that, like you were saying, back in the day, you'd make like $250, $300, and sometimes that included the drive up, where you drive for 8 hours, walk into this very unfriendly bar with people that didn't really want to see you there. And then you'd leave the next day and drive back.
And I didn't realize how much comics have been taken advantage of until I saw that documentary on the Improv in the Comedy Store and the places where you wanted to go to hone your chops in order to make the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson or whatever. But basically, it was almost slave labor when you think about it.
It really was. I mean, you either got paid nothing, or if you did a guest spot on a weekend, you might make $25 if you're lucky. And I remember when I started venturing down in the States a little bit, doing some shows, I got offered a headline gig at a club in one of the hotels there. And mind you, it was my first time in with them, but I've been doing it for quite a while. So they said, "Oh, they saw you at this show at the Ice House and they loved it and they want to book you in." And they offered me, I think it was $650 for, it was either 9 or 11 shows in a row.
Wow.
And I'm like, I turned it down. I'm like, thanks, but no. How about no?
Well,
that's not even close to
the hopes and dreams thing has always been a thing in the film industry, and like they can prey on that. And I think comedians had a lot of that. Like, I'll do it for free now, but later things are going to get better. And having that feeling, but I can imagine there's a lot of people that would take advantage of that and say, you know what, hey, we got these I'm going to get 5 comedians for free, right? And I can imagine that people have gone through that, and maybe there's some advice on how you could protect yourself from that, or I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think the advice would be try not to rely on it for an income. I know there was a period of time there where different clubs were coming into town, and the Yuck Yucks chain had felt threatened at the time, and they were trying to get comics to sign exclusive contracts to only work their clubs. They weren't guaranteeing them work. They weren't guaranteeing them money. They just said, "We don't want you to work anywhere else."
Wow.
which sounded like it was the most insane sounding thing to me ever. I'm like, why would you, if you're not promising me any work, why would I limit myself even more in an industry that's already tough to get ahead in? So yeah, the clubs, even like you say, the iconic clubs in the States, it was really cutthroat for those performers coming up. Like doing amateur nights at, say, the Laugh Factory, they would literally put you on at 2 a.m. and give you 3 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And you had lined up, at noon or something, and you hang out and you get your 3 minutes. It was real tough.
And you would do it in the hope that someone in the audience was, say, one of the bookers for,
Right.
talk shows, and you get a shot on that, and boom, next thing you know, you're a star. So what made you, I mean, I'm presuming do you still jump, pre-pandemic, I might add, do you still get the urgency to, or tendency, do you still jump up on stage the odd time, or have you sort of shifted your focus away from stand-up?
I have shifted it away. I mean, part of it is, this is a personal thing, but I mean, I'm over 50. I think it's more of a young person's game. Not to say that there's older comics out there that aren't wildly entertaining. There are, but I think it is a bit of a young person's game. I still find myself writing jokes, though. I don't do as many. There's a few clubs like the Kino, which sadly they just announced is about to close, which is run by Steve Allen, who used to do stand-up himself. He's an old friend of mine, and it's a really sad day for Vancouver, because I don't know where they did, like, I forget what the number was, 800 shows over the span of those many years in that venue, inviting comics to just come up and do whatever they wanted, which was incredible. But yeah, I don't know. It's just it's a weird world to try to get ahead in.
And Peter, we touched on the pandemic and a lot of people getting hurt through that and whatnot. But what about, if we could touch on a little bit about the cancel culture and political correctness and what that's done to comedy? Can you maybe comment on that without offending?
Yeah. I think a good degree of it is warranted. It's an easy thing. It's a slippery slope. When is somebody, I remember years back, Michael Richards from Seinfeld fame I think he was at the Laugh Factory when he was going off on a big thing, and then he thought it would be funny in his rant to fire out the N-word repeatedly, and everybody in this day and age, and even then, had cameras, so they filmed it, and it was pretty detrimental, I think, to his career. And it wasn't a great idea. It wasn't particularly funny. So when you look at something like that, you're like, wow, that seems kind of deserved, because it's socially unacceptable to do that.
Yeah.
But when people are, I mean, I did a lot of characters in my routine, doing different voices, like Asian voices, East Indian voices, Greek voices. And I very rarely, really rarely had anybody offended by the joke, because I always, when I did a character like that, or a nationality like that, a certain voice, I was very conscious never to put them in a derogatory situation.
Yeah.
It was always a story of, wow, I went to a store, or I had a contractor, and then launch into my East Indian contractor telling me something that I couldn't understand. So I never put them in demeaning situations, and I never really had people call me on that, because it was never my intent.
But do you think
to do that?
That's what I'm kind of getting at, like that same routine that you're talking about.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I'm going to go out there and say it is a joke, and it's, in my opinion, it's harmless. Do you think people are afraid to put on that type of performance nowadays, like what you just said?
Yeah, I know a lot of people are hesitant, I'll say that, to do that now. The spectrum of acceptable things now is much more narrow. And like I say, part of it is warranted, but another part is, you used to have the peripheral comics that were, the bad boys or the bad girls of comedy that would touch on those subjects. And now I don't think we're going to see much of that, if ever again, for a long, long time.
What I find is odd, Peter, and we don't want to make this point too hard, but what I find is odd is Hank Azaria, with the voice of Apu on The Simpsons, for
right.
of years and seasons. Obviously, they've relished the character to the graveyard, and he's now really apologetic to the Indian community. And
Yeah.
people in that community are going, we weren't offended by it. We thought it was cute.
Yeah, he seems really offended, or not offended. He seems really bothered by it personally, and I mean, I don't know. I don't know him personally. I agree that I think he's apologized, and I agree with you that the community itself seems to be not as offended as he thinks they are. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but I don't know. It's for me, that's what I always enjoy doing with voice, is doing other characters and other nationalities and accents and all of that. That's what I like thriving in that arena. And nowadays I've had auditions come along that say they're ethnic specific, in the sense that it's say an Asian voice, and I'm not allowed to audition for it, even though it's a voice. So that part I don't agree with.
So, Peter, tell us about some of the voice work that you've done, because you, again, have really sort of jettisoned yourself from Peter Kelamis, actor, to Peter Kelamis everything.
Yeah, I mean, I've been lucky. I always did characters and voices and stuff in my stand-up growing up and along the way, and that parlayed into voice work. I mean, some of the more notable ones are like Goku and Dragon Ball Z, and Rolf and Ed and Eddy. Those are probably the two biggest ones that I've done. I just finished a series for Netflix literally 10 days ago. And in amongst other ones I've been lucky enough to stay very, very busy in the animation world.
A little sample of a voice, or you got something for us that you can throw down?
One I did, and this was a bit of a cheat, but there was one called Krypto the Superdog a number of years ago, and they had this kind of squirrely little Tail Terrier was his name, and I clearly at the time just ripped off Ross Perot, like to the I didn't even try to mask it. It was just like, we got to get up there and get this in there, don't run my name. And it was just like you rip off the voice completely, and they were like, "Yeah, it's great." So they rolled with that. But there's times, I remember one time there was a series called Class of the Titans, and it was kind of this Greek mythological kind of kids animated action show. And I remember I went in and I read for a couple of characters, and then there was a character called Grandma Hercules, which Hercules' grandmother. And I said, "Oh, before I leave, I want to read for that." And they're like, "Oh yeah, right." And I said, no, I'm serious. I want to read for that one. They're like, okay. And so I read for it, and then I got it because I just did my Greek grandmother. You know, you draw from what you know. So it just turned into, "Oh, Hetty, why don't you lay down? You look so tired." And again, I'm playing a female, which again, nowadays they even try to be gender specific into the roles. And again, to be fair, there's a lot less female roles available. There's more now than there used to be, but they do have less roles. So, I mean, I can understand why somebody might have been upset that I got this female role there. It was kind of special circumstances that I was just doing my Greek grandmother and landed that one.
During your career, Peter, have you always remained Vancouver based? Was there ever the lure or the desire to maybe, go elsewhere? Yeah,
I mean, we've ventured down to the States. We have a place in the States, and have ventured down. The majority of my work, though, is Canada, and I say Canadian based. A lot of US shows that are up here, obviously, and there's a tremendous amount of work here. And it's always the city that you kind of grew up in is the city that the casting directors and the people that direct that kind of thing know who you are. So even breaking down into LA, my resume looks huge, but there's still a lot of people who don't know or don't trust who you are because they haven't worked with you before. So it's still a tough nut down there heading down as a Canadian.
Good. Does your timing go off the longer you stay away from it? Like, could you jump up on stage, assuming that a stage will open soon? Could you jump up on a stage today and pull out your last set, your last routine, and still kill with it?
I'd be terrified. First off, I'd feel rusty as hell. I'd be pacing around. The stand-up, almost every single show I did, I was always nervous before. I couldn't really eat before. beginning to end, from day one to the last show I did, always very nervous. The corporate ones almost made me sick to do because the stress involved.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I would do it. It would scare me, but I'd do it.
Oh, maybe you have to do it one more time. We'll see in the future when things get back, right?
Sorry, what?
I said in the future, you're probably going to have to do it at least one more time.
No, I'm sure I'll do more than one. And like I say, I still find myself writing down things, and I'm like, well, this will be a good bit when I get a chance to do it.
As we asked Paula, having seen you, you don't do a lot. I don't really believe you do blue, do you?
I don't. Like I say, it's more character based, and although there's some bluish comics that have made me laugh over the years. That's never really been my flavor of comedy. I've always had the rule of, is this going to make me laugh? And that's what I'll do. And luckily throughout the years, there's been other people that share that kind of flavor of comedy. So I got to do it for quite a while.
So Peter, I got a question for you. Just, you have a long career, film as well, not just stand-up. Who would you say is the most famous person you've ever worked with or met or had an encounter with?
I wish I could say who I just worked with like 4 days ago, because they're probably the most famous person I've gotten to work with. Two of them, actually. I just finished a movie, and both of them were huge names in their own right. And it's annoying that I can't say who they are because I can't mention the project. But along the way, though, one thing I did from my very first gig was I kept my sides.
Yeah.
Now, for those who don't know what sides are, listening and watching the program, they're the mini scripts that you're handed when you get to set. They're miniaturized, so they're easier to handle. You got to put it in your pocket, but they have all the info of the scenes, but they also have a list of who's working that day on the movie with their character number. Like if the star of the movie is number 1, and then it goes down chronologically in order of the size of the role. So I kept those from day one, and some of the names I still have are Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, Morgan Freeman, Kevin Spacey, Seth Rogen. I mean, there's over the years there's been some really cool names on there.
That's mostly Vancouver work that you
primarily. I got to do a few episodes of Glow about a year and a half ago, and that was pretty cool because we loved the show. And Gina Davis, sitting there chatting to Gina Davis, you catch yourself pinching yourself sometimes. You're kind of starstruck being there, and you're like,
It's odd that as we're recording this, it's Oscar night, and I guess tonight you can watch them and go, worked with him, worked with her, you could probably nail a few of them off, right? Like that.
Yeah, a few, and it's always pretty neat, and it's fun too. Like I still get invited to a number of conventions throughout the years where you go and you sign autographs and sell some merch, that kind of stuff, and I've even met some pretty interesting people there that I grew up watching, because some of them, they have kind of themes to them. They're like, oh, it's a 70s, 80s kind of convention. And you go, that's Bernie from The Love Boat, literally.
I was talking the other day, I think I was talking to you, Joe, about this and I thought it was a funny thing. You ever realize that there's people that you meet or they meet you and they know who you are, but it's just good enough for like a good glance back. Like Joe has hundreds of people that he's interviewed or talked to, but you pass them in a corridor and it's like, I know you, but not quite enough to acknowledge you. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm talking about when I say that? Like you get those people that are just, it could be a pro athlete or hockey guy or anybody, right? You've met them, but not quite enough.
I do get that. I probably get that more than people who actually know me and can mention a name, that matches.
Yeah.
But especially at conventions too, like there's a couple of big ones like Dragon Con that happens in Atlanta, Georgia every year. It's a massive one that happens Labor Day weekend. And it's all sorts of, it's not just sci-fi, it's all sorts of TV. And they have something called the Walk of Fame where they put all the quote celebrities in for signings. And that's been cool because I've gotten to do that a number of years. Last time I was there, I remember Peter Mayhew was sitting across.
You're
I was on one side of the hall, he was on the other. And just as I'm getting picked up to get taken back to the airport to fly back out, he was right there. It was in the alleyways of the hotel, but there he is, like Chewbacca having a smoke. And I'm like, I don't want to bother him right now, you know. And he's since passed away. And now I'm like, oh, maybe I should have bothered him and just, but no, I didn't. It was the right choice. He's just sitting there. He's been dealing with crowds all day and he's just having a smoke. And I was like, it just kind of looked over and it was a bit of a nod. But you get to meet some really cool people that you grew up watching sometimes.
No doubt. Well, this was a first for us, Peter, because this is our first Zoom interview for Everything Film. And it's also a weekend, and I know you're a family man, so we really appreciate you taking the time. And hopefully when we can remove the masks and get amongst each other once again, hopefully down the road, we'd love to have you in with us so we can chat some more, because it's great to catch up with you.
Well, it's been great, and I'd love to.
Thanks, my friend.
Thanks so much.
Cheers.
Peter.
Thanks a lot, guys. Take care.